This week's winner, the IPO Index, which is blowing the S&P 500 out of the water right now. This week's loser, anyone who thought the prospect of a Fed rate hike could slow down new stocks.
And with a solid foundation in place for a broader IPO rebound, the only thing missing is filings. Let's get into it with this week's winners and losers.
Quick note before we dive in, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing we discuss should be taken as investment advice or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any security. Past performance does not guarantee future results, and one cannot invest directly in an index. For the full disclosure, check the end of this recording. So let's walk through the week because the story is the gap and what's missing from the pipeline. So we had that big macro news. The Fed held rates flat, but hinted at a future hike, and that kind of rattled markets. That said, the IPO index still ended the week up 6.8%, so completely dwarfing the S&P's 0.9% return.
Yeah, and just stepping back a bit here, the year to date on the IPO index is a 30% rally. That is triple the S&P 500. So we are now back to where we were before the 2022 sell-off, highest point since 2021.
hmm There's some nuance here, though. We definitely can look to growth stocks and kind of that renewed interest as a potential driver, but not every growth index joined the party this week. The NASDAQ 100, Russell 1000 growth just didn't see the same gains.
Yeah, and I think differentiated returns are exactly why new stocks earn a seat in a balanced portfolio. This isn't just, tech went up. New stocks behave a certain way, in part because they're underrepresented in many portfolios.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we do have this kind of one flaw in this really rosy picture. It's
Mhm.
that if we don't see a pickup in filing soon, the whole outlook for July gets a bit shaky. It's the rally's there. It's just the supply hasn't caught up yet.
Mhm.
But digging in now, let's start where everyone's still looking, and that is the SpaceX aftermarket. We saw this surge on Monday, a kind of continued rise on Tuesday, and then just a retreat. It still finished the week up about 15%, closed at a $2.4 trillion market cap, putting it right behind Amazon.
Yeah, that was a nice stat from the newsletter. Let's sit with that for a second. The largest IPO ever is now jostling with Amazon by market value. That's surreal.
Yeah, how is it? 4 days old, and it's
Mhm.
one of the biggest companies on US markets. There's certainly volatility, though, and we expect to see that in the near term. We have that first lockup release in August, so it seems like all of this is kind of conviction trading for now.
And here's the real debate that I've been wrestling with. Is SpaceX a bellwether for the whole IPO market, or is it just for a handful of mega IPOs or Anthropics or OpenAIs?
Can we say bellwether light? I know one deal definitely doesn't broaden a market, but the index rally underneath sets a foundation for a wider rebound.
Yeah, that's a fair point. The mega deal did prove that demand exists. So the question is whether it trickles down to everyone else on file. And while we're on the topic of SpaceX, Avery, did you see how many of those daily 2x leveraged bull and bear SpaceX ETFs have launched? Just, browsing the internet, I found six, and I was not looking for them. They just presented themselves to me through ads. Uh, I looked it up just now. I think there was 10 total that people were counting.
Hmm. I think that's some targeted advertising doing
Oh
its
yeah,
job, Matt.
I Google a lot of SpaceX stocks.
I was gonna
So
say you said SpaceX
and
one too many times, and
yeah, an
your phone has
ETF.
been listening.
Yep.
Yeah. But on the supply side, the pipeline was actually a soft spot this week. I know you're talking about trickling down to these filings. We really just had one major new one. That's C Square, a data center owner.
Yeah, data centers, that's the right theme. AI power demand just keeps on rising higher and higher, keeping the category hot. But one name is not yet a wave. Filing this week would have allow for a post July 4th launch. So we were kind of expecting or looking out for some filings because that July 4th period does tend to be a seasonally strong time for launches.
Yeah, getting out right ahead of that
Mhm.
August slowdown. Where there's still plenty of notable names on file, but it's not the flow of new additions we expected. What we hoped for, I think, what would have made us optimistic about a stronger July.
Yeah, I think that's the July story for now. The outlook really does hinge on seeing some filings in the next week or two. And if they don't come, the calendar starts to thin out pretty fast.
Yeah, it's like we've got the index returns. We've got this really strong backdrop, and the issuers really just need to read the tape and move.
Yeah. Uh, I was wondering how much of this is due to possibly SpaceX. We were getting questions about whether the IPO market would slow down around the time that it went public, and that didn't happen. There were several other IPOs the same week that SpaceX went public, and then several IPOs this week. Uh, but maybe we're still seeing a little bit of an overhang. Maybe that just thins out the calendar a bit over the next month. But I should note too that we are recording this 15 minutes before the SEC site closes. So who knows? Maybe we'll get 10 filings as soon as we stop recording. Hopefully not.
Yeah,
Or maybe
hopefully
so.
not. But that definitely would not that tracks with
hmm
the way that filing activity is. It's definitely possible that come 520 we see
hmm
this like huge spike. So I don't know. A little bit hope we see them for the calendar. Hope we don't, so that we can start this holiday week pretty early.
Yeah.
And speaking of that holiday week, on the deal side, we did have three deals priced this week, and the lineup tells a story. We had Kardigan in the lead, a cardiovascular biotech. It upsized, priced at the high end, and then traded up. So it's another clean win for drug developers and kind of this trend we've been seeing with biotechs.
Yeah, confident biotech print, upsizing in a short holiday week. The market clearly rewarded it. Just a note on Cardigan, I thought this was funny. So this is coming from the team that brought us Myocardia, a 2015 IPO, bought by Bristol Myers Squibb in 2020 for 13 billion. I know that the director of research during the call, he said, "Is it Cardigan because they're doing like myocardia again?" I thought that was clever.
Yeah, that is clever. Or they just really love sweaters, I
Yeah,
guess.
could be that.
Yeah, and that was joined by these two smaller names. We had a community bank, First Carolina, and then Deep Fission, which is a pre-revenue nuclear tech firm. So First Carolina kind of falling into this regional banking mini theme we've seen and traded about flat. And then Deep Fission, which kind of looked like X Energy from a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, but worse. And public investors seem to think the same thing, traded down 9% on day one.
Yeah, I think we've talked about how some of these IPOs are following the same playbook that others, the same path that others tread before them. So, with First Carolina, you've got Forbright last week. With Deep Fission, you've got X Energy. But on that note, obviously didn't help that X Energy has broken issue since going public. But yeah, broadly speaking, it's an interesting spread this week. A biotech, a regional bank, and a nuclear moonshot. At least some of that moonshot appetite that we've been tracking is still alive and well, but based on this trading, it's not exactly a blank check either.
hmm Yeah, and that nuclear theme kind of ties straight back to this AI power thesis. And in that space, we've seen some pre-revenue issuers find a window. It's just, yeah, not in this case. The risk appetite is still there, but investors are definitely discerning,
Mhm.
which, yeah, I think is a good sign.
Yeah.
And in that AI theme, we have more news from the next potential mega IPO. Um, OpenAI had a leak in its financials, and we saw a $21 billion operating loss on 13 billion in revenue for 2025. Not a pretty picture.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about Anthropic and OpenAI basically every week. Clearly, I think they want to be in the news. Although with this financial leak, I was not too sure if that was coming from them, if they really wanted to be known for that, because it is a heavy loss. I mean, people were wringing their hands over how much SpaceX was losing, but based on this, OpenAI's operating loss is about 8 times larger. But I think the number that matters here too is that 250% growth rate. So the whole bull case really rides on whether that number is sustainable.
hmm So I think there's a silver lining here, like you mentioned about maybe the company, putting it out to public investors before it preloads the expectations. There are going to be fewer surprises when the actual S1 hits. Nobody is going to get that like WeWork style surprise we had in 2019.
Yeah, I think that's true. When the company files, you don't want the headline to be $21 billion loss. Maybe they can, yeah, get out ahead of, although it is a lot to get out ahead of. It's a staggering amount of losses. At the same time, I think it helps that investors are willing to underwrite the SpaceX IPO, and they are obviously planning on ramping up CapEx, staying unprofitable, at least for the very near term.
Hmm.
So. I think investors will want to see a path to the operating losses narrowing and maybe sometime by 2028, hopefully getting positive. But it's also possible that they won't and they'll just buy it because of the name.
Yeah, I think this really follows the same idea as SpaceX by the decade, not the quarter framing.
Mhm,
OpenAI's, I feel like, gonna have to almost certainly make a similar pitch. Or you're right, and it doesn't really matter. They'll
mhm,
see the name, and that'll kind of keep them going initially.
mhm.
So, moving to the scoreboard for existing new stocks, as we mentioned, it was a strong week, but we had a surprise at the top. A quick rehash: IPO Index up 6.8%, S&P up 0.9%, and the winners in the IPO Index were a mix of AI-related names mostly, but the top wasn't AI.
Right. The crown this week went to Equipment Share, a construction rental company that was up 32% on a wave of insider buying. So insiders putting their own money in, that's a signal worth noting, of course.
Yeah, when management buys, the market listens. And it is nice to see a non-AI, non-thematic name lead every once in a while.
Yeah, of course, those did appear as well. Top IPO index holding ARM was among the winners, as was CoreWeave, a pretty direct AI infrastructure play. And then at the bottom, Venture Global off 16%.
Yeah, and that was one that we, I think, just a few weeks ago had at the top
Mhm,
on that AI power trade. So energy's volatility cuts both ways, I think, with this name in particular.
mhm.
So zooming out, what does this whole setup actually tell us? The index is absolutely the story, up 30% year to date, triple the S&P, shrugging off a Fed hint. So the new stock asset class is proving its differentiation.
And of course, SpaceX sitting on that $2.4 trillion market cap, not too far behind Amazon, shows that the mega deals are holding up post-debut. That foundation matters. Of course, it's still early innings, but the stock was able to hold up even after the IPO day hype started to fade.
hmm But the honest gap here is the pipeline. One major filing this week, a roaring index with the new supply, is an opportunity that needs issuers to act.
So if the filings don't materialize, all this momentum has really nothing to feed on.
Yes, and that is exactly why issuers should be reading this tape and filing now. The window is about as wide open as they could hope for.
Yeah, not for every sector. I think software is still,
Mm.
as we mentioned, a little soft there, but definitely much wider than it was even a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and there's plenty of names in that private backlog that could play on these themes that are working. So, what are we watching as we head into this next week? And I think you can imagine what the first thing will be: filings and filings and filings. July's whole outlook hinges on new names hitting the pipeline in the next week or two.
And probably we'll be watching SpaceX aftermarket. Of course, we'll still be keeping an eye on it. Does the volatility settle, or do we just keep on getting these surge and retreat weeks ahead of the August lockup release? I'm looking for a day where the stock does not move more than 5%.
hmm Yeah, and I bet OpenAI will be looking at that as well. And I'm sure we will be watching OpenAI as well. Now that the financials leaked, will we see any more concrete details start to materialize?
Will Anthropic release their own leaked financials or something? But yeah, and just to sum up, also, of course, hitting on this, a strong week for the index. We just need the paper to match it. And that's it for this week's winners and losers.
hmm Get the full newsletter in your inbox by clicking the link in the description. Thanks for listening. And before we go, please listen carefully to our full disclosure. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Renaissance Capital statements should not be considered investment advice or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any particular security. Certain of the statements contained may be statements of future expectations and other forward looking statements that are based on Renaissance Capital's current views and assumptions and involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties that could cause actual results, performance, or events to differ materially from those expressed or implied in such statements. Past performance does not guarantee future results. One cannot invest directly in an index.